My name's Scott Henderson. I'm a psychologist from BSI Training and Development, and welcome to Training Bites. This is where we give you a small taster of the kind of training that we do at BSI, and today I'd like to talk to you about giving effective behavioural feedback. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, or feel free to disagree, but I think Australians tend to be poor at giving feedback. I think there's restaurants that go out of business without ever hearing a complaint. Have you ever seen this? A waitress comes over and says, "How are your meals?" What do we say? "Fine, thanks, lovely." She goes away. "They're horrible. We'll never come back here." Australians tend not to give feedback, and it's a skill we've never been taught. Right? Australians tend to be afraid of coming across as rude or aggressive. We don't want to upset people. So we tend to avoid it, not only in our personal life, but also in business as well. And what I'm going to do today is take you through the steps of giving effective behavioural feedback. Because what people tend to do is they tell the other person what they're doing wrong, and the other person tends to get defensive. And then they tell the other person what to do, and the other person does the opposite just to prove a point. We're going to get around that by taking 4 steps. Right? 4 steps. And the 4 steps are: describe the specific current behaviour, identify situations or examples, describe the impacts or consequences, and discuss the alternative behaviours. So let's go through each of those steps. The first one is describe the specific current behaviour. What you need to do is you need to give feedback about behaviours, not concepts. You never give someone feedback about a bad attitude. What would you give them feedback about? You give them feedback about what they said or what they did. "Bill, yesterday I heard you say to a client, 'Look, it doesn't matter, just send the information.'" You never give someone feedback about poor attention to detail. What do you give them the feedback about? The specific examples that they made, what they left out, what they did wrong. You wouldn't give someone feedback about poor time management. "Kel, you've been late to work by 20 minutes 3 days this week." It has to be specific, right? And say what you saw, not what you think about what you saw, which as managers, we've got to be very, very careful with second-hand feedback. A colleague comes to you and says, "Could you have a chat to Scott? He's doing something wrong, but please don't tell him I said anything." Be careful with regards to when you give that feedback. A lot of people, because of avoidance, tend to save it up, and they save it up until they can't stand it any longer. And there's what's called the emotion logic seesaw. When emotion goes up, logic goes down. Right? And we wait till we get to here before we give the feedback. And because the emotion's up here, we're not thinking it through very clearly. We don't plan the feedback. And so what we need to do is you need to give the feedback as soon as it happens. Be prompt with that feedback, but do be careful about time and place. Be careful about who you give that feedback in front of. You don't want to embarrass someone. I'll give you an example where I got this wrong. A number of years ago, I was working for a company, and I watched a director of the company. He was a big South African guy. Director of the company ripping shreds off someone in an open plan office in front of half a dozen people. I waited till he finished, and he walked past my desk. And as he walked past, I stood up, walked with him, walked around the corner, pulled him into a meeting room and said, "Can I just give you a quick bit of feedback? What did I do wrong?" He was still pumped. And I gave him the feedback, and as I gave him the feedback, he just glared at me and he said, "Are you done?" And I thought, I think I am. And then he said, "Good, now I want to give you some feedback." And I don't think his feedback was that objective, to tell you the truth. He started by calling me an old woman, and then he got offensive. Okay, so identify the specific current behaviours. Then step 2, you've got to back it up with evidence. Don't generalise. You always do this. You never do this. It's too easy to refute. So have 2 or 3 examples or situations. Why not 1? Well, 1 indicates a mistake. And if someone makes a mistake, tell them and fix it. Don't make a big deal. If someone does something wrong 2 or 3 times, what have you got? You've got a pattern. And if you've got a pattern, there's some underlying cause driving that behaviour, and that behaviour is likely to continue. I'll give you an example. I don't do my work, but my work doesn't remain undone. What happens to it? Someone else does it. Am I going to change on that one? Of course not. I'm winning. I'm out of here at 5 o'clock, they're here till 7 o'clock because they're doing their work and mine. I'm not going to change. Perhaps you've got a staff member that brings all their problems into work, constantly complains about their relationship and life in general. That person's being rewarded for that negative behaviour. How? They get attention and they get sympathy. So if you have a pattern, you need to shift that. And the only reason someone's going to change their behaviour is because they want to. And why are they going to want to? Because of the consequences. Look, no smoker thinks smoking is good for them. They've seen the ads on TV that are scarier than any horror movie, but there's not enough consequences for them to change. I used to do the old, every cigarette takes 10 minutes off my life, but that takes 10 minutes off the end of my life, and they're rubbish years anyway. What it took for me to change was my wife becoming pregnant. The moment she became pregnant, I immediately stopped smoking at home. All right, so you've got to have consequences in order to drive the behavioural change. And the consequences have to be for who? They have to be for them. Not for you, not for the organisation, not for the client, but for them. And the consequences have to be real. They can't be possible consequences because they might not happen. Right? And they've got to be sufficient for that person to make a change. You need to show them that their behaviour is causing them pain and that changing that behaviour will reduce that pain. And if you're their manager, you can sometimes create some consequences, but don't ever make threats and don't say something you can't back up. Okay, so you've described the current behaviour, you've identified some examples, you've described the impacts and consequences for them. Step 4 is discuss the alternatives. And my advice here is ask them. What's the beauty of them coming up with the answer? They've got buy-in. Right? They're more likely to do it. Why? Because they think the person that thought it up is brilliant. Right? Interestingly, often people know what they need to do, they just don't want to do it because there's not sufficient consequences. So if you go through this process, you're much more likely to frame this up as a positive experience. You're much more likely to get a behavioural change, which is ultimately what you're looking for. Interestingly, use the same 4 boxes in order to give positive feedback. Quick example where I did this recently. As a trainer, I tend to fly quite a bit. Flying backwards and forwards to Canberra with Qantas, I was on the Dash 8s, you know, planes with propellers. I don't like propellers, I like jets, but that's beside the point. Twice when I've flown, I had an airline steward that remembers everyone's name on that plane. Fantastic. He walks up the aisle and he talks to you by name. Would you like a cup of coffee, Mrs. White? Would you like a magazine, Mr. Jones? I assumed he just had the seating manifest. But as you get off the plane, you get off in different orders because you're getting bags and jackets and things. And as I got off the plane, he said to me, "Welcome to Canberra, Mr. Henderson." It's a bit weird. Okay, didn't think too much about it. A couple of weeks later, same flight, same steward. As I get off the plane, "Welcome back to Canberra, Mr. Henderson." That was impressive. Stopped me in my tracks. I turned around and said, "Mate, I just need to give you some feedback." The way you remember people's names like that, I fly all the time, no one ever goes to the effort to do that. The feeling that personalisation and customer service should not be underestimated. I want to say keep up the fantastic work, and I'm going to ring Qantas and tell him how impressed I was. Same 4 boxes. And you will be glad to know I did ring Qantas on Monday. And do you think I could remember his name? Oh well, they looked it up, and if you're interested, his name's Dean. Keep up the good work, Dean. Okay, so now we know how to give behavioural feedback. All we need to do now is identify the situations, sit down and plan it, give the behavioural feedback, and help people out. I've given you a quick overview of how you go about doing this. For further information, feel free to contact us at BSI Training and Development. The number's 9216 4017. Good luck and help your staff. Thanks very much.